Dad, we've decided Christmas this year is just for our immediate family. You're not included. That was my son's text. Then his wife sent her own message 2 minutes later. Perhaps when you learn to respect boundaries, you'll be welcome at our table. I read both messages standing in my kitchen in Oakville, still wearing my work coat, and I thought of the $6,800 I had quietly moved into their accounts the month before. Then I picked up my phone and replied with 4 words. Understood. Payments stopped today. 40 minutes later, my phone showed 67 missed calls. I should explain the kind of man I am before I explain what I did. I spent 38 years as a structural engineer in the Greater Toronto area, retired at 63, and have lived alone in the same house in Oakville since my wife Colleen passed away 5 years ago. I am not a dramatic person. I do not raise my voice. I do not make scenes at family dinners or send long emotional emails. I prefer numbers, load calculations, clear documentation of what holds weight and what doesn't. When something fails structurally, you don't argue with it. You document the failure and redesign. My son Aiden is 36. He married his wife 4 years ago, and within 6 months of the wedding, she had reorganized most of his decisions, including his relationship with me. I say this without particular anger. It's simply what happened. My son, who used to call me twice a week, began calling once a month, then once every 2 months. The calls became shorter, more transactional. Can you help us with the down payment? Dad, the car lease is coming up for renewal. Could you cover it this cycle? We want the kids in a French immersion program. The fees are steep. I helped with all of it. Colleen had left me in a stable position, and I had my pension, my RRSP, my savings from 38 years of careful engineering salary. I am not a wealthy man, but I am a comfortable one. And what I had I shared, because Aiden was my only child, and his kids were my grandchildren. And after Colleen died, there was no one else to share anything with. The text arrived on a Tuesday evening in the second week of November. I had driven back from a consultation I occasionally do for a civil engineering firm in Mississauga. Just enough contract work to keep my mind engaged. The kitchen still smelled like the soup I'd left simmering too long. I read my son's message, then his wife's message, and stood very still for a moment. She had used the phrase, "learn to respect boundaries." I turned that over in my mind. I thought about what boundary I had failed to respect. At Thanksgiving in October, I had brought wine and stayed 4 hours and helped my grandson build a Lego set before driving home alone. At their daughter's birthday in August, I had arrived on time, brought the exact toy from the exact list my daughter-in-law emailed me, and left when she gave the first signal that the afternoon was wrapping up. I tried to think of what I had done. I kept coming back to empty space. I sat down at the kitchen table with my phone. I opened my banking app. I had set up a series of automatic transfers and pre-authorized payments over the past 3 years because my daughter-in-law managed their household accounts, and it was easier, she said, to have predictable deposits rather than asking me each time. I had agreed because I wanted things to be easy. I scrolled through the list. Mortgage supplement, FET $900 monthly to help cover their townhouse in Brampton, while Aiden's income stabilized after a job change. Car insurance for both vehicles, $340 combined monthly, because they were still on my broker's plan from when Aiden was younger, and I had never changed it. The after-school program for my grandson, $480 per month. French immersion fees for my granddaughter, $620 quarterly, which I was billing monthly for clarity. Grocery transfer, $300 a month, which had started as a one-time pandemic gesture and quietly become a standing arrangement. The total, when I added it clearly for the first time in a long while, was $3,340 per month, $40,080 per year, for 3 years. I looked at that number for a long time. I had never seen it written in one place before. I had approved each piece separately, each one reasonable in isolation, and had never stood back far enough to see the whole structure. I set my phone down on the table beside my reading glasses and said nothing to the empty kitchen. Then I picked it up again and typed my reply to the family group chat. Understood. Payments stopped today. I didn't add anything. I didn't explain. I pressed send and watched the 2 blue check marks appear confirming they'd read it. I opened my bank's website on my laptop. I had configured these transfers methodically, which meant dismantling them was equally methodical. The mortgage supplement first. I navigated to pre-authorized transfers, found the entry, clicked cancel. A confirmation screen asked me to verify. I confirmed. Then the insurance billing arrangement. That required a call to my broker the next morning, which I noted on a pad of paper. Then the after-school program, which I was paying through a parent portal with a saved card on file. I logged in, removed the card, flagged the account as inactive. French immersion, quarterly payment, same process. The grocery transfer last, a simple recurring e-transfer that took 8 seconds to cancel. My phone had begun vibrating before I finished the third item. Aiden calling. I turned it face down on the table and kept working. By the time I closed my laptop, the screen showed 9 missed calls from Aiden and 4 from my daughter-in-law. I turned the phone completely silent and put it in my coat pocket while I reheated the soup and ate at the kitchen table in quiet. Outside, the November dark had settled over the street. The Hendersons across the road had their porch light on. A car moved past slowly on the wet pavement. I thought about Colleen. She had worried about this, not this exact situation, but something like it. She used to say that Aiden had a talent for accepting help without understanding its cost. Not the financial cost, the other kind. She died before she got to see how right she was. That night I took out a legal pad and wrote out every transfer, every payment, every contribution I could recall over 3 years. Not because I intended to present it to anyone, just because I needed to see it clearly, the way you need to see a structural drawing clearly before you can assess whether a building is sound. The total for 3 years came to just over $120,000. I put down the pen, made tea, and sat with that number for a while. It didn't make me angry exactly. It made me tired in a specific way that I recognized as the feeling of having done something for a long time, without asking if it was working. The next morning, Wednesday, I called my broker first thing and removed both my son and his wife from my insurance plan. My broker, who has known me for 20 years, asked no questions. Then I called a real estate lawyer in Burlington named Gordon Ashworth, who a former colleague had recommended. I explained the situation briefly. He asked a few clarifying questions, requested copies of whatever documentation I had, and said he'd be in touch by the end of the week. Aiden called 11 times that Wednesday. My daughter-in-law called 6 times and sent 14 text messages, which I read without responding to. The messages ranged from demanding to confused to quietly threatening. One of them said, "You are going to regret this when the kids ask why their grandfather abandoned them." I saved a screenshot of that one. A message arrived Thursday morning from my daughter-in-law's mother in Guelph, a woman I had met perhaps 4 times at family events, who wrote, "I don't know what you've done to your son and his family, but I am praying for you to find kindness in your heart." I appreciated that she identified me as the source of the problem. I spent Remembrance Day weekend quietly. I watched the ceremony on television, made a proper stew, organized some files in my home office. My phone lit up regularly with calls I didn't answer. On the Saturday, my son appeared at my front door. I saw him on the doorbell camera, hands in his coat pockets, breath visible in the cold air. He knocked twice, then a third time. He stood there for about 4 minutes, occasionally turning to look at the street before walking back to his car. I felt something watching him through that small screen. Not satisfaction, something more like grief, which surprised me. I had expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt the particular sadness of watching someone you love do exactly what you feared they would do, and being unable to prevent it without losing yourself entirely. Gordon Ashworth called Friday. He had reviewed the documentation I'd emailed him, and he was direct about the situation. Any financial contributions made without a written agreement were considered gifts under Ontario law. I could not recover them. However, the mortgage on the Brampton property was clear. The property was purchased in their names only. There was no legal obligation of continued support. He asked if I owned any property connected to them. I told him about the cottage. The cottage was Colleen's family property, transferred to me after her parents passed. It sat on Simcoe County, a 3-bedroom place on a quiet lake. We had spent every August there for 20 years. After Colleen died, Aiden and his wife had been using it regularly, sometimes twice a summer, once at March break. I had never charged them anything. I had continued paying the property tax and maintenance because it was my property, and I assumed that was clear. Gordon said it was legally very clear. He recommended I formalize this with a letter confirming the property was mine and no usage arrangement had been documented. He drafted the letter by the following Wednesday. It was simple and professional. It advised that as sole owner of the property, I was revoking informal usage access, effective immediately, and would be contacting them separately about retrieving any personal items stored at the location. The courier delivered it to their Brampton address on a Thursday. The volume of calls increased significantly. The first voicemail my daughter-in-law left that I actually listened to was 6 minutes long. She covered, in order, how selfish I was, how Colleen would be horrified, how the children had done nothing to deserve this, how I had always made her feel unwelcome in the family, how Aiden had given up other opportunities to stay close to me, and finally, how she intended to post publicly about what kind of father and grandfather I was. She did not mention the $120,000. She did not mention Christmas. She followed through on the social media threat inside 2 weeks. I found the post through my neighbor across the street, Marguerite, a retired school teacher who follows local community boards online, and mentioned it gently over the fence one morning. It was on a local Facebook parents group, several hundred members, most of them in the Oakville and Burlington area. My daughter-in-law had written a long post about being abandoned by her father-in-law, without warning, just before Christmas, with 2 small children in the house. No explanation given, no attempt at conversation. She mentioned the cottage specifically. She said the children had been promised Christmas there every year. I read the post at my kitchen table with my coffee. I thought about the phrase promised Christmas there every year. I tried to recall making that promise. I recalled 3 Christmases at the cottage when Colleen was alive. I recalled 0 after. I messaged 2 people I'd known professionally for many years, colleagues from my engineering career who were also Oakville residents and might have seen the post. I sent each of them a single screenshot. My daughter-in-law's text from November, the one that says that I had not yet learned to respect boundaries. I added one sentence. This arrived before I changed any financial arrangements. No other context changed. I didn't ask them to respond or to defend me. I sent it and let them do what they would. I heard nothing more about the Facebook post. December arrived cold and gray. I called my son once on a Sunday afternoon 2 weeks before Christmas. He answered on the second ring, which told me he was waiting. I said what I had to say without preamble. I want to see the kids at Christmas. Not in your house if that's uncomfortable. At my house or at Marguerite's if you need a neutral place. But I want to see them. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said my daughter-in-law wouldn't agree to it. I said I understood. I asked him to tell them their grandfather was thinking of them. He said he would. I spent Christmas Day alone and did not feel sorry for myself about it. I cooked a proper dinner, rack of lamb with roasted root vegetables, the kind of meal Colleen used to make when she was trying to impress. I opened a bottle of Niagara ice wine I'd been saving, and I sat at the dining table I've sat at for 30 years and ate a good meal in my own house, and that was enough. In January, I retained Gordon formally for the cottage matter. We sent a follow-up letter requesting that Aiden and his wife arrange to retrieve their belongings, a kayak, some children's outdoor equipment, a box of Aiden's things from his mother's era, within 30 days. My daughter-in-law texted back from a number I hadn't blocked yet to tell me she would sue me for the cottage, that she had texts proving we had agreed she could use it indefinitely. Gordon's response was brief and clinical. She produced no such texts because they did not exist. The matter closed without further action. In February, my son stopped trying to contact me entirely. The silence was different from the silence of the holidays. That one had felt like waiting. This felt like a door closing. I opened my investment accounts in February and ran projections I should have run 3 years earlier. At $3,340 per month invested conservatively, over 3 years, I had foregone somewhere between $125,000 and $135,000 in net worth. I had also foregone the compound growth on top of that. I moved the amounts I was no longer transferring into a dividend ETF and watched the contributions accumulate with a satisfaction that felt slightly embarrassing in its simplicity. I called my financial advisor, a woman named Priya who has managed my accounts for a decade, and updated her on the changed circumstances. She was professional and asked no personal questions. At the end of the call, she said, "It sounds like your retirement projections have improved considerably." I said they had. March brought a phone call from my son's aunt on Colleen's side, a woman named Agnes who lives in Hamilton and who I have always genuinely liked. She called on a Sunday afternoon, and unlike the call from my daughter-in-law's mother, she did not preamble it with prayers or accusations. She said, "I heard what happened and I'm not calling to take sides. I just want to know how you are." I told her honestly. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Colleen used to say Aiden had a habit of choosing the path of least resistance. I think she knew something would eventually give." I thanked her. We talked for another hour about things unrelated to any of it. Her garden, a book she'd been reading, the state of the Hamilton waterfront, which I had consulted on early in my career. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. In April, my son called. Not my daughter-in-law. Aiden himself on a Tuesday evening, from what I recognized as the parking lot of his office building based on the background sounds. He said, "I don't know how to say I'm sorry for something that I'm still not sure I understand completely. But I know what she sent you was wrong. I knew it when she sent it. I didn't stop her." He paused. "That was wrong of me." He didn't ask for anything. He didn't mention the payments or the cottage. He said he needed to figure some things out and he would call again when he had. I said I appreciated him calling. I meant it. I did not reinstate any payments. In May, I put the cottage up for sale through a listing agent in Barrie. It listed at $685,000 based on recent comparable sales in the area. I had an accepted offer within 3 weeks, a retired couple from Newmarket who were looking for exactly that kind of place. My son found out through Agnes, who mentioned it gently when she called to check in. He called me the same evening, his voice tight in a way I recognized. He said, "The cottage," and I said, "Yes," and he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That was where Mum ashes are." I said, "I know. I scattered them there the summer after she died. I asked you to come and you said you were too busy that weekend." He didn't respond to that. We stayed on the line for another minute. Then he said, "Good night." The sale closed in late June. I netted $497,000 after fees and capital gains. I moved most of it into GICs and added a portion to a TFSA I'd been underusing. On the evening of close, I stood in my backyard in Oakville with a glass of scotch, watching the last light go over the tree line, and I talked to Colleen in the way I've talked to her since she died, not out loud, just a kind of interior conversation that I've never been able to explain, but also never felt the need to. I told her I had finally stopped trying to buy his attention. I told her I thought she would have been disappointed in him, and I was right. I told her I missed her every day, and that the missing had not diminished with time the way people said it would, only changed shape, become something I carried rather than something that carried me. Then I went inside and made dinner. The summer passed quietly. I did the occasional contract consultation. I played golf twice a week at a club I'd been a member of for 15 years and had rarely used. I had lunch with Agnes in Hamilton once a month, which became a thing we both looked forward to. My neighbor Marguerite and I fell into the habit of coffee on Saturday mornings when the weather permitted, the two of us on my porch with mugs, talking about nothing consequential. In August, Aiden called again. He was working 2 jobs, he said, a software position he'd taken during the pandemic and a part-time contract role he'd picked up in the spring. His daughter had moved to the public system for grade 1. My grandson was still in after school, but his wife's parents were helping now. He said this without bitterness and without any implicit request. He simply said, "Things are tighter, but we're managing." I said I was glad to hear it. I meant that too. I asked about the children. He told me my granddaughter had lost her first tooth in June and had been deeply offended when the tooth fairy left only $2 because she'd read online that the average was now 6. I laughed. That was the first time I had laughed during a conversation with my son, in what felt like a very long time. He said, "She asks about you sometimes. I tell her you're doing well." I said, "Next time she asks, tell her I'd like to see her." There was a pause. Then he said, "I'd like that too. I need to talk to her mother first." I said I understood, and I did. In September, I drove to Mississauga on a Sunday afternoon for what Aiden described as an informal lunch, which turned out to be him and the kids at a restaurant near their neighborhood, without my daughter-in-law, who was visiting her mother in Guelph for the weekend. I don't know if that was planned or coincidental, and I didn't ask. My granddaughter had grown 1.5 inches since I'd last seen her, and informed me of this within 30 seconds of arriving. My grandson was quieter, more watchful, but he sat beside me during lunch and showed me something on his tablet and let me look for a long time without taking it back. We ate poutine. We talked about school, and the NHL preseason, and a documentary my granddaughter had watched about deep-sea creatures that had apparently rearranged her understanding of the ocean. I ordered dessert we hadn't finished. Nobody mentioned any of what had happened. There was nothing to resolve, anyway. There was only this table, these children, this afternoon. When we said goodbye in the parking lot, my granddaughter hugged me around the middle and held on for a moment longer than the hug required. My grandson shook my hand, then changed his mind and hugged me too. I drove home on the QEW with the late September light coming through the windshield, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not vindicated, not triumphant, just present in my own life, in my own skin, inhabiting an afternoon that belonged to me. My daughter-in-law and I have not spoken since November. I do not expect we will, not in any real way, perhaps if not ever. Aiden calls on Sundays now, not every week but most weeks, and the calls are short but honest. We are building something new on the foundation of what collapsed, and I have no idea yet what it will look like. That uncertainty used to feel like failure. It doesn't anymore. On a Tuesday evening in October, I opened my banking app, not to cancel anything this time, just to look. The accounts were healthy. My monthly obligations were my own. I had not transferred $1 to anyone since November of the year before, and I had not been asked to. The compound interest on what I'd saved was doing quiet, patient work the way compound interest does. I thought about what it had cost, not the cottage, not the money, the year, the distance, the Christmas dinner I ate alone, the months of silence with my son, the phone calls I didn't answer, and the ones I wish I had. I don't regret any particular decision, but I carry each of them honestly, as the price of having finally drawn a line and stood behind it. The Hendersons across the road had put their Halloween decorations out. The maple on my front lawn had gone fully red, the color it goes every October, the color Colleen used to stand at the window to look at every year. I can see it from where I write this. Some things you lose and don't recover. Some things you stop funding and they stop existing. And some things, if you're patient and honest and willing to wait, come back to you changed but real. On a Sunday afternoon in a parking lot in Mississauga with a child who holds on a little longer than the hug requires. That's enough. It really is.